Like sharp axe blades in battle, the wind mercilessly cut through the icy waters of the North Sea. The raging elements seemed to foretell an imminent end of the world, and thunder echoed like the roar of an ancient dragon awakened from centuries of slumber. Through the turbulent waves, Viking ships bravely pushed forward, their sails torn to shreds and their masts bent under the storm's assault, like the bleeding wounds of old warriors refusing to yield. On that fateful night, only one small vessel, by fate cast upon the rocky shore of a deserted island, managed to escape the fury of the raging elements. Among the wreckage, damp sand and dense fog, something lay hidden that would forever change the course of history. There, amidst the shattered planks, a golden gleam caught the eye of Leif Jarl, a man whose name was already spoken with respect and awe. The leader of a clan renowned for its unheard-of strength and countless riches knelt before the mysterious object. His battle-hardened hands reverently touched the golden ring. Its weight felt strange to him, as if it bore the burden of all the world's wars and sorrows. The ring was adorned with ancient runes, symbols whispering tales of power, death, and betrayal. But little did Leif know what trials awaited him. A new era began for Leif. His battles, once fraught with hardship and bloodshed, were now won with astonishing ease. His people prospered as never before. Their lands expanded and their wealth doubled with each passing season. Yet, with every victory, the warnings of the ancient elders sounded increasingly ominous. "This ring," they cautioned, "once belonged to the dragon Fafnir. Its curse will befall whoever dares to wear it." Leif merely scoffed arrogantly in response, convinced that fortune had finally smiled upon him. But the true cost of his luck remained veiled from his proud eyes. Fate favored Leif Jarl in a way that defied all reasonable explanation. Week after week, he knew no defeat. His enemies fell like autumn leaves caught by the wind, offering no resistance, as if Fafnir himself guided his hand. His troops were more invincible than ever before. On golden evenings, shouts of triumph echoed across the hills, and as the warriors returned from battle with countless spoils, the golden ring seemed to glow even brighter with each victory, as if it were a symbol of uncontrolled, all-consuming power. But the first inklings of the curse began to surface in the shadows, where no one dared to look. At night, when Leif's people slept, he heard disturbing whispers, muffled voices in taverns and in the council tent. The wealth grew, but the price that had to be paid for it became increasingly evident. Enemies, once posing a serious threat, died without apparent cause. Some perished in battle by their own comrades' hands. Others suddenly succumbed to mysterious illnesses. Something far more sinister lay behind these deaths, something that chilled Leif to the bone. He felt a dark presence around him, but his pride prevented him from questioning the source of his success. The elders, with their wrinkled faces and ever-watchful eyes, began to speak of the ring fulfilling its malevolent purpose. "This is not merely gold you have acquired, Jarl," they warned. "You have opened the gates to the realm of the dead. Fafnir merely awaits his moment to claim your soul." But Leif did not heed their words, blinded by his insatiable thirst for power. He believed that the strength of his clan could defeat any evil, even that which lay beyond the mortal world. Yet the winds of fate were already beginning to turn, and soon the true price of Leif's choice would be revealed in all its horrifying splendor. Time passed, and Leif Jarl's power grew so rapidly that even his own people began to feel uneasy in his presence. He seemed possessed, a being for whom no achievement was ever enough. Warriors whispered uneasily about the changes in their leader. Leif was no longer a man concerned with his people's welfare. He saw only the glory of his triumphs and his ever-increasing wealth. The golden ring, which he now wore constantly, seemed to be the source of his transformation, an energy that gave him strength but simultaneously alienated him from his humanity. On the darkest nights, Leif woke with a strange sense of dread. He saw shadows gliding around his tent, felt an unseen presence, and more than once heard sounds as if claws were scraping against the walls of his fortress. But in the golden ring's radiant glow, all this seemed insignificant. Others did not realize how deep a chasm he was digging for himself. Even the wise elders, with their long beards and discerning gazes, began to dread the great Jarl's downfall. They knew that what Leif was building had roots in cursed ground. The leader's ambition had eclipsed even his vision of the stars, and the curse, like a dormant beast, awaited its moment to strike a devastating blow. When the first deaths began to occur within his own ranks, Leif found himself in a nightmare he could not control. His loyal men died unexplained deaths, falling on the very lands he had conquered with blood. Many vanished without a trace, while others fell victim to severe and seemingly incurable ailments. Yet, a persistent thought echoed in his mind. This is the price of greatness. I cannot stop now. The ring, with its bewitching energy, sustained him in a state of euphoria, as if guiding his actions, but simultaneously blinding him to the growing horror within his own halls. He did not yet understand that the ring's power was destroying his life, consuming his very blood and essence, like a serpent devouring its own tail. The thickening atmosphere heralded the dragon's imminent presence, and Leif's nightmares grew increasingly tormenting. In his dreams, a colossal and malevolent Fafnir appeared before him, its eyes blazing like hot coals, its breath scorching with flame. The dragon whispered words of doom, foretelling the ruin of all his accomplishments. But Leif, blinded by his hunger for power, ignored the ominous prophecies, convinced of his invulnerability. Popular adulation had turned his head, transforming the elders' warnings into mere superstitions. Only when a sinister shadow drew near his tent did he grasp the encroaching menace. The gathering storm clouds mirrored the impending confrontation as Leif Jarl assembled his army for the decisive battle. His forces, once spread across distant lands, now faced a formidable enemy at their very gates. It was an alliance of southern kingdoms, alarmed by Leif's escalating power and fearing for their lands and wealth. Battle banners waved proudly, shields gleamed in the dim light, and the air filled with war cries. Tension was palpable, yet Leif felt no fear. Gazing at the ring on his finger, he sensed Fafnir's presence, as if the dragon stood beside him, imbuing him with an incomprehensible power. "Let the battle begin," Leif proclaimed, his voice piercing the wind's roar. At his command, the warriors surged forward like an unstoppable tide, ready to crush the enemy. Swords met in a furious dance, and the battlefield became a bloody chaos of steel and flesh. Leif, a whirlwind of destruction, cut down his foes, driven by an inhuman strength, an ancient power he could not comprehend, but which propelled him onward. However, as time wore on, Leif began to notice ominous changes. His warriors, once full of indomitable energy, fell one by one as if struck by an unseen blight. They died not from wounds, but from something that sapped their very life force. The ring on Leif's finger glowed ever brighter as he continued his bloody path, but the horror of his people's demise began to seep into his soul. Looking skyward, he froze in terror. A colossal shadow, eclipsing even the sun, descended from the hilltops. It was Fafnir, the dragon, who had broken free from his confinement. He was not merely in the ring, he was here, in material form, an embodiment of death and fury. Spreading his gigantic wings, he unleashed a hurricane-force wind upon the battlefield, knocking warriors off their feet. His eyes blazed with infernal fire, and his roar made the earth tremble. Leif's enemies, previously certain of victory, fled in panicked disarray. But for the Jarl, the battle was far from over. He could not surrender when triumph seemed so close. With a defiant roar, Leif raised his sword and charged the dragon, propelled by an unknown force. He rained down a flurry of blows upon the beast, but his attacks proved useless against Fafnir's impenetrable scales. Each swing of his sword only intensified the dragon's fury. Fire erupted from its nostrils, incinerating everything in its path. Yet Leif did not falter, possessed by a desperate belief in his victory. With each passing moment, he felt the crushing weight of Fafnir's curse grow heavier. With every strike, his strength ebbed, his body weakening like a flickering candle. In the midst of the battle, as Leif prepared to strike a fatal blow, an unbearable pain pierced his chest. His knees buckled, and the ring's power gripped him like iron shackles, dragging him into an abyss. Fafnir, whose eyes blazed with furious fire, let out a low, sinister laugh that echoed across the battlefield. "You will never find freedom, Jarl. The power you craved merely feeds the darkness, poised to devour your soul." An exhausted Leif looked up at the sky. The battle was not yet over, but victory seemed unattainable. The ring, which had once guided him to greatness, now led him to ruin. In the aftermath of the battle with Fafnir, days filled with dread and devastation descended, as if the world itself was bracing for its end. Leif Jarl, the great conqueror, the unyielding leader, now felt the crushing weight of his own pride and ambition. The golden ring, once gleaming with the power of gods, now felt like a prison. He could no longer sleep. His dreams were haunted by images of Fafnir, whose flaming eyes pursued him night after night. With each dawn, the burden of the curse grew more unbearable. Every movement, every breath became a tormenting struggle. The Jarl lost the rapport with his people, those who once looked upon him with admiration. Now only fear was reflected in their eyes, as if some malevolent blight had infected the very essence of their leader. The battlefield seemed to follow him everywhere. Stones he touched were stained with blood, not the blood of enemies, but that of his own warriors. Leif began to notice his people dying, not from wounds, but from an unseen evil that consumed them from within. They withered like autumn leaves caught by the wind, and no one could explain the cause, as if a supernatural force was slowly siphoning their lives away. While the Jarl desperately tried to cling to power over his people, a far more terrifying threat loomed. Fafnir the dragon was not defeated, nor did he intend to vanish. He merely lurked in the dark corners of Leif's soul, where his curse continued its destructive work. The dragon's wrath manifested not only in fiery breath and thunderous roars, but also in deep decay, a spiritual sickness that infected everything it touched. Leif, his body weakened and spirit broken, began to realize that his pursuit of greatness had culminated in the greatest of downfalls. The ring, which had brought him victories and riches, now held him captive in the abyss of his destined fate. He had become the architect of his own life's tragedy. Leif's city, once a thriving fortress with stone citadels and bustling streets, began to wither. Market squares lay empty, and war cries were replaced by groans of despair. Even his own children, who once saw him as a hero, now feared him. He watched them from afar, noting the pallor on their faces and the terror in their eyes, as if they sensed their father was transforming into something more than just a man. Loneliness became an unbearable burden. The weight of the curse inexorably consumed him, and with each passing day, he felt himself drifting further from who he once was. The cursed ring had stripped Leif of everything: his health, his peace of mind, his family. He understood that his only chance for salvation lay in destroying the ring, but how could one destroy what seemed indestructible? In a desperate search for a solution, the Jarl summoned his closest advisors and led them to ancient temples where old runes and sorcery were studied. They scoured dusty scrolls and forgotten myths, but nothing offered hope. Then an old priest, whose beard was as long as the night spent in prayer, approached Leif and whispered a single word: Fafnir. The priest spoke of the necessity of sacrifice, asserting, "Fafnir's curse cannot be broken by strength or wisdom. It can only be undone by sacrifice. The dragon, like a serpent biting its own tail, can only be defeated when the soul of the ring's owner is consumed. To overcome it, you must sacrifice yourself, Jarl. Your life will be the key to the dragon's destruction." Leif looked at the ring adorning his finger. He felt the dragon's presence once more, as if Fafnir was mocking him, anticipating his final act. The Jarl realized that the only way to atone for his guilt and save his people was to embark on a solitary journey, a final confrontation with the curse that had become a part of him. He bid farewell to his children and his people, knowing he would not return. The sacrifice he was about to make was not only to destroy Fafnir, but also to free his own soul from the eternal torment and ruin he had brought upon himself. The night was unusually dark when Leif, sword in hand and the ring on his finger, set off into the mountains where the dragon awaited him. The wind howled through the treetops, and the stars seemed to hide behind a thick veil of clouds. But Leif did not falter. He knew this would be his final battle. Step by step, he approached his destiny, and as he neared the caves where Fafnir dwelled, he felt the heavy burden of the curse on his heart, yet also a strange relief from the impending sacrifice. He was ready to face the dragon not as a power-hungry warrior, but as a man seeking redemption. Impenetrable darkness reigned in the caves, and the thick, damp air was permeated with the stench of death and decay. The echo of Leif Jarl's footsteps reverberated through the walls like a harbinger of inevitable doom. It seemed Fafnir's curse had reached its highest concentration here, deep beneath the earth where the dragon's power lurked. He felt the weight of the golden ring, like a chain binding his wrist and tightening with each step. He sensed a rising heat emanating from Fafnir's presence. The dragon, vast as fate itself, lay in wait for the opportune moment to strike. Leif knew there was no turning back. He had already sacrificed everything he could, his honor, his family, and now he was ready to give his own life. The ring no longer shone as brightly as before. Now it seemed dull, as if it too sensed its end. Finally, reaching the heart of the cave, he saw Fafnir. The dragon was not as he had imagined him. It was not merely a creature woven from strength and fire, but something far darker, more ancient. Fafnir was linked to the very essence of the earth. His scaly hide reflected the faint light of the flames burning deep within. His eyes, yellow as glowing embers, radiated such pure malice that a chill ran down Leif's spine. "You have come, Jarl, but victory does not await you here. Your soul already belongs to me by right of the curse," Fafnir rumbled in a voice like distant thunder. Leif did not reply, but merely raised his sword, preparing to meet his end. The weight of his decision became clearer with each passing second. The ring grew heavier and heavier, and he felt the connection between him and the dragon intensify, as if an invisible force was pulling him into the very inferno. The clash between Leif and the dragon transformed into a deadly dance, where untamed might met otherworldly power. The Jarl rained down blows with furious rage, but they seemed to slide harmlessly off Fafnir's hide, who retaliated with a hail of claws and scorching flame. Fire erupting from the beast's maw transformed the cave into an arena of light and shadow, melting stone and making the air unbearably hot. Leif dodged desperately, his muscles burning from the strain, his vision blurring in the smoke and heat. The battle seemed endless, yet the warrior knew he had to find a way to conclude it. At the most critical moment of the duel, the ring flared once more, this time with such intensity that Leif could barely endure its radiance. He felt the dragon's power permeate him, as if the might that once belonged to Fafnir now invaded his very flesh. The Jarl collapsed to his knees, his sword becoming an unbearable weight. It seemed the ring was consuming his soul, dragging him into a bottomless abyss. Fafnir, noticing this, lunged forward with a triumphant roar, certain of his victory. But Leif, gathering his last vestiges of strength in a desperate surge, raised his sword, understanding that the only way to defeat the dragon was to destroy the source of its power, the ring. With a cry of pain and self-sacrifice, Leif plunged the blade into the pure gold. At that very instant, a blinding explosion ripped through the cave, as if the world itself had split in two. The dragon let out a furious shriek, its claws reaching for Leif, but it was too late. The ring shattered into fragments, and the curse that had tormented the Jarl was instantly lifted. Fafnir, letting out a death shriek, disintegrated into flame and smoke, his colossal form dissolving into the air. Leif collapsed to the ground, life ebbing from him like water slipping through his fingers. In the ensuing silence, the storm that had raged across the world began to subside. Leif Jarl's blood mingled with the earth, and his final breath was a sigh of relief. He understood that his life had been consumed by the thirst for power, and now he had paid the price for the dragon's curse. His name might not be etched into history as that of a hero, but he would be remembered as a man who, standing on the brink of ruin, did everything possible to save his people from the destruction he himself had unleashed. Thus, Leif Jarl's name faded into the shadows of history, his memory preserved only in the hearts of the few who knew the true story of his rise and fall. The golden ring, shattered into pieces, vanished with him, carried away by the cold waters that had once swallowed his ship, and then him. The lands of the north, freed from Fafnir's curse, continued to thrive, remembering the steep price of power and ambition. As years passed, Leif Jarl's name gradually faded from human memory, yet the lessons of his fate endured. During long northern nights, elders around campfires recounted his story, not as a heroic epic, but as the tragedy of a man blinded by ambition and an insatiable hunger for power. They spoke of a man who had everything, yet sacrificed his soul for what he desired most. His tale became a cautionary warning for those who dare to dream of greatness without contemplating the consequences of their choices. The golden ring, broken and forgotten deep within the cave where Fafnir once dwelled, transformed into a legend, a symbol that boundless power always comes with a price. Many sought traces of Leif, hoping to uncover the secret of immeasurable wealth and conquests, yet no mortal dared to touch what once belonged to Fafnir, fearing that the curse, even without the ring, might afflict those who coveted it too intensely. The lands Leif once ruled prospered. His wealth was divided among his heirs, but the world he had tried to conquer with fire and sword was never truly the same. The price had been paid, the sacrifice made, and Leif Jarl's sole legacy became the memory of a grand ascent, followed by an even more devastating fall. His descendants ruled wisely, yet the shadow of their father's history always loomed over them. They understood that no matter how much they strived for honor and prosperity, they could never forget the dragon. And so, Leif Jarl's name dissolved into the mists of time, yet the story of the Jarl consumed by the dragon's curse, the one who touched gold and lost everything, would live on forever. It would serve as an eternal lesson for those who dared to strive for the impossible, a reminder that the greatest treasure is balance, and that unbridled desire can become the most terrible of curses.